Okay, again, thank you so much for coming out today. I want to take just a few minutes and talk about two of the air quality related programs that we have here at Land to Sky Regional Council. First, our Clean Air Campaign. We established the Regional Clean Air Campaign 11 years ago to increase public awareness on air quality issues and actions that people can take. And through our program, we encourage energy efficiency, and we also encourage reduced driving or low emission driving through all of our various campaign messages and activities. And I do believe that we've really seen an increase in awareness and also action over that time period, thanks to the hard work of all of our campaign outreach partners, many of which are in the room here today, and also due to the help of the media. The media has been extremely supportive to us over the last 11 years, helping us get information out, and I appreciate all the media representatives being here today to help us do that. We launched a Land to Sky Clean Cities project 5 years ago to promote the use of alternative fuel and cleaner or low emission vehicles. And we're currently seeking Clean Cities designation from the U.S. Department of Energy for a 5-county area around Asheville, and we expect to achieve that special federal designation sometime later this year. So we're very pleased with the local interest in alternative fuels and cleaner vehicles, and I wanted to just mention some of the examples, some of the good action. The city of Asheville has been a leader for many years in the use of alternative fuels and cleaner vehicles. The city began using compressed natural gas fueled vehicles several years ago and opened the region's first publicly accessible natural gas fueling station downtown across from McCormick Field. And we now have a second public access natural gas filling station down in Arden on Hendersonville Road, and 2 more on the way due to some of the funding that's come through just recently. Also, Mission Hospital has bought a fleet of CNG-powered Honda Civics, and they also have a fleet of electric vehicles showing their commitment to both cleaner air and improved health here in Western North Carolina. So they're really standing out and doing their part. Alltech Eco Energy in Arden is converting vehicles to natural gas, and they have recently received EPA certification to convert the Ford Focus, Fusion, and Transit Connect vehicles to natural gas, and soon they'll be able to convert the F-Series pickup trucks, Ford pickups. In addition, Blossman Gas and their partner Alliance Autogas are working to convert several fleets in the area to propane, including a portion of the Mountain Mobility shuttle bus fleet here in Buncombe County. Many entities throughout the region are using domestically produced biodiesel that is helping to reduce particulate matter and other harmful emissions, including the Metropolitan Sewerage District, City of Asheville, Buncombe County, Town of Black Mountain, UNCA, Warren Wilson, Progress Energy, Henderson County, Hendersonville, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the Grove Park Inn, the Asheville Regional Airport, and many others. As many of you know, Blue Ridge Biofuels is located right here in Asheville, and they're producing biodiesel, and they've opened publicly accessible biodiesel pumps across the region. We now have 11 biodiesel stations in the region, most of which are here in Buncombe County. In addition, Haywood Community College got a grant about 2 years ago, and they're also producing small quantities of biodiesel, and they're using that to teach biodiesel production as part of their new sustainability program in Haywood County. The City of Asheville, Black Mountain, Montreat, AB Tech, Haywood Community College, and several others are using pure electric vehicles in their fleets, mainly the low-speed electric vehicles that have been available. And many entities, including Buncombe County government, are using gas-electric hybrids to save on fuel and to cut their emissions. And all these entities are working with us, working together through our Regional Clean Vehicles Coalition. And we encourage other people to join us and get active in the coalition. It's a great opportunity to network with others and to tap into some of the funding that is available. Just last week, we launched a new initiative, our Electric Vehicle Get Ready initiative, to get our communities in the region ready for the rollout of the new all-electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrids that will be coming out over the next year or two, and to get them ready by putting in electric charging stations in strategic locations. So we just launched that last week, and we encourage anyone interested in that project to give us a call. As I mentioned, there are a lot of grant opportunities out there to help you green your fleet. The U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. EPA, the State Division of Air Quality, and the State Energy Office all have grant programs, and we can help you secure that funding to green your fleet. So I encourage you to contact me if you have a project that you think might be eligible for those. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Vicki Sandford. Vicki's with the U.S. EPA's Health and Environmental Impacts Division, and I'll let her say a little bit more about her background, and she's going to discuss the EPA's proposed revisions to the ozone pollution standard. And Vicki, thanks so much for coming all the way from Raleigh to be with us today. Appreciate it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Bill, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me here. And I'm very impressed with the amazing laundry list there. It sounds like a lot of good work is already being done, and I'm sure it's producing results, so that's wonderful. I've been with the EPA for about 20 years, and I've worked on the environmental impacts of air pollutants, mainly on plants and ecosystems. I work in the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards, in the Health and Environmental Impacts Division, in the Ambient Standards Group. I spared you the acronyms. Okay. So, let's see if I can, there we go. I'm going to give a little background of the program that I work in, and maybe many of you are familiar with this, so I'll try and move quickly, but I'm not sure how much everyone's familiar with this. This is called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards program. It's in the Clean Air Act, and it requires EPA to set primary and secondary NAAQS, that's our favorite acronym here, for 6 common air pollutants: ground level ozone, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, lead, particulate matter, and sulfur dioxide. There are 2 different types of standards that are under this program. There's the primary standard, which is designed to protect the public health, including the health of at-risk populations such as children, people with asthma, and older adults. The secondary standard protects public welfare and the environment, including sensitive vegetation and ecosystems. The law requires EPA to review the scientific information and the standards for each pollutant every 5 years, and to get advice from the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee. This is made up of independent scientists, and they provide advice to the administrator of EPA regarding the science that is underlying the standards and what they think is the appropriate understanding of that science. Different considerations apply to setting the standards versus trying to achieve them, and it's kind of important to see this distinction. In setting the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, we only are allowed to consider the science related to the nature of the health and environmental effects, as well as risk assessment kinds of information that we do, and air quality information, but we're not allowed to do a benefits cost assessment. Congress intended the setting of the standards to be based on what was seen to be necessary based on the science itself. And then, though, when it comes to achieving the NAAQS, working with state implementation plans and other types of efforts, there's certainly the opportunity to take into account the cost of setting those standards, finding the most efficient ways to achieve those, looking at the technical feasibility, and the time needed to attain, and those are all different considerations that come into play. So ground level ozone, and I'm not going to continue to say ground level ozone, but I hope you all will keep that in mind. So we know that there's ozone up high in the stratosphere, and that is more protective of the environment, but ozone at our level causes problems for health and the environment. So I'm going to just refer to it as ozone from this point on. But it's not emitted directly in the air. As many of you know, it's produced when you have emissions of precursors such as nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, and methane. And in the combination with sunlight, it actually cooks, so to speak, and produces the ozone. There are some biogenic emissions also from plants that contribute to this, but in the absence of anthropogenically produced NOx, you probably wouldn't have much naturally occurring ozone. So it's a contribution from both of those. Mainly a summertime pollutant, although we are seeing levels in excess of what we used to in certain areas because of oil and gas exploration and other things. We're seeing higher levels in some locations earlier in the spring and even in the winter time. So, but typically it is a summertime pollutant. Ozone levels can be high both in urban and rural areas. In urban areas, you tend to see a different pattern of ozone than in the rural or remote high elevation sites. In urban areas, you tend to get a peak during the daytime as ozone levels build up due to the increasing temperatures and the increasing number of emissions from vehicles, et cetera. And then those high levels often are transported outward later at night or further on into the high elevation rural areas. Also, if you get precursors, as I mentioned, like NOx being transported out, that can combine with the natural biogenic VOCs and produce levels in excess in the rural areas. Okay, in 2008, EPA reviewed and revised the identical primary and secondary 8-hour ozone standards by lowering the standard level from 0.08 parts per million to 0.075 parts per million. Those 2008 standards were not as protective as recommended by the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, and this is sort of a big deal because usually EPA takes the advice of its Science Advisory Committee and this time did not. And there's a requirement that EPA explain in a very reasonable and rational way why we would make a decision outside of what our scientific advisors recommend. In this case, we got sued on our standards, and the CASAC actually wrote a letter after our final decision to say they were very disappointed that we did not follow their advice. When the new administrator came in, under this administration, she decided that it was appropriate to reconsider these decisions on the basis that I just mentioned. She wanted to make sure that these standards, which are considered two of the nation's most important air quality standards, were clearly grounded in the science and would protect the public health with an adequate margin of safety. That's part of the language of the Clean Air Act that it is required to meet, and protect the environment from any known or anticipated adverse environmental effects. As you may know, it is the goal of this administration to have science be in the forefront of the regulations that it produces, and so that was a very strong consideration in this. The proposed revisions that are out there now were based on the scientific and technical record available in the 2008 review. So in reconsidering the decision, we are limited to only looking at the record that was available for that 2008 decision. It included more than 1,700 scientific studies, and EPA's Office of Research and Development also did conduct a provisional assessment of newer studies just to make sure there was nothing that was going to totally change our thinking. And in that case, they found that none of the new studies had results that would materially change the conclusions of their earlier scientific assessment. So we didn't do a full review of the new science, but just looked at it quickly to make sure there was no groundbreaking study out there that was going to totally cause us to need to rethink that. In January 2010, EPA proposed its revisions and then published the proposal in the Federal Register on January 19th, and that started the clock for a 60-day public comment period, and that just ended March 22nd. We had 3 public hearings, one in Arlington, Virginia, one in Houston, Texas, and one in Sacramento, California. All those were well attended, so we got some good feedback there. And the final rules are expected to be issued August 31st in 2010. And, oops, I'm sorry, I forgot. Please feel free to interrupt me and say turn the slide. At the bottom is a website that you can go to for more information on the proposed the reconsideration, and there are fact sheets and other types of information that might be useful. All right, ozone, as we mentioned, affects public health, and I'm going to run through a list of things that effects that are known to occur. Breathing ozone can reduce lung function, making it more difficult for people to breathe as deeply and vigorously as normal. For people who have normal lung capacity, this may not be an effect, but for those with already compromised lung capacity, they may notice a good bit of difficulty as they're trying to exercise or do other things. Ozone can irritate the airways, causing coughing, sore, scratchy throat, pain when taking a deep breath, and shortness of breath. Inflame or damage the airways, increase the frequency of asthma attacks, increase susceptibility to respiratory infection, and aggravate chronic lung diseases such as asthma, emphysema, and bronchitis. These effects can lead to increased medication use among asthmatics, more frequent doctor visits, school absentees, and increased emergency room visits and hospital admissions. And this one's kind of a scary one. Increased risk of premature death in people with heart or lung disease. Children are at an increased risk from exposure to ozone because their lungs are still developing and they are more likely to be active outdoors. Other categories also include outdoor workers and people who are exposed for extended periods of time. This is a graphic that is used quite often with our health folks here, and what it's meant to show is sort of like the tip of the iceberg. If you're seeing increased emergency room visits, I'm pointing with my imaginary pointer here. Now I know there's one. The second tier down where it says emergency department visits, etc. If you're seeing an increase there, you can imagine that there's an increase all the way down. You're seeing more effects, school absentees, respiratory symptoms, people who may not show up at the doctor's office but who are increasing their medicine use, that kind of thing. So this is meant to show that even if you're not able to measure it, once you start seeing effects at the top, you're actually, there's a cascade going on down below. Okay. So the proposed revisions to the primary ozone standard are that EPA is proposing to strengthen the standard to change the level to be within the range of 0.060 to 0.070 parts per million. So a level will be selected within this range, and I'll explain a little bit that the reason we put forward a range is that it depends on how much weight you put on different parts of the evidence as to where you might end up in this range. This is the range that the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee proposed or recommended, but there are different ways to look at the science. In some cases, people feel that the uncertainty may be too great at the lower end or at some point in the range, and other people feel like in spite of that uncertainty, we need to protect with an adequate margin of safety, and that's very important. So there are different ways to view the evidence, but this is the range that is being proposed. We're also proposing to update the air quality index along with this standard. So at whatever level it is selected, the air quality index will be updated to reflect that change in level. So this proposal places additional weight on key pieces of scientific evidence, including evidence showing effects in healthy adults at the 0.060 level. And it's very important, as we said here, to note that we're only allowed to test healthy adults, which is probably a good thing. So we don't go stick an asthmatic in a chamber. But if a healthy adult is being impacted, then you can imagine that an asthmatic would be impacted even more. So this is why when we're required to look at an adequate margin of safety, you're often looking at setting a level below that in which you have strong effects in healthy adults, because we know that ozone affects unhealthy adults even more. I'm gonna skip over the rest of this, but there's a lot of evidence that EPA is looking at this time. So I'm going to move on to the secondary standard, which is set to protect ozone in the environment. And I'm not sure how much people know about plants, but they take up ozone. It's kind of like your lungs. They have holes in the leaves called stomata that allow for uptake of ozone into the leaves. And during the daytime, the plants are trying to produce food for themselves using sunlight and carbon dioxide from the air. But ozone also gets in, and it interferes with the process of food production. By limiting the plant's ability to produce its food, the plant then has to allocate what it is able to produce, and sometimes it doesn't allocate it the way it normally would. The plant normally puts a lot of its resources into root production. That is because the roots are what pick up the soil nutrients and the water, help nourish the plant, and it also tends to put its resources into reproduction, seed production, that kind of thing. For crops, it's yield, what we call yield, agricultural yield. So if ozone is affecting the amount of food the plant is able to produce, you're going to see a loss of growth, loss of biomass, and I'll just point to the picture on the left here. These are cottonwood seedlings, saplings. They start out as seedlings, and they were grown along a gradient from the New York City area out into a more rural area of New York. And as I mentioned, you can have high rural ozone levels when you don't have as high in the urban areas. Part of that is due to the breakdown of ozone at nighttime from NOx and other things that are being emitted in the urban area. So in the rural areas, you are actually having higher cumulative ozone, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so the plants on the right there are those that are in the rural area, and they're being stunted by the ozone. Now, cottonwood is a very fast-growing species and very sensitive, so it's sort of on the upper end of sensitivity, and you see more effects. But in general, you can imagine that some plants are being affected in this way. So if the plant is unable to increase its root growth and seed production, you start seeing a loss of competition. You also see a weakening of the tree, which can lead to the plants being more susceptible, and not just trees, I'm sorry, but other plants too, being more susceptible to certain diseases, insects, harsh weather, and other pollutants. And so I've just put a few graphics up here. But one very telling example is out in California in the San Bernardino Mountains. The ponderosa pine there was attacked by bark beetle many years ago, and it really decimated the population there, and additional more tolerant pines started to move in. And when that happens, you can get a shift in the species composition within a forest, and that can even change the fire regime in an area, because some plants are less tolerant to fire and produce more woody biomass that lays on the ground, so you actually can have a range of effects there. And ozone can also visibly injure the leaves of plants. We call it visible foliar injury, and here's the picture down at the bottom, which can affect the appearance of vegetation in national parks, recreation areas, and cities. And we consider this important in areas where people go to see the nature and trying to see pretty scenery, and if the leaves don't look good, that can affect their experience. Also, there's some crops, leafy crops, that can be affected by ozone, and so that can affect how well they sell. Okay, so EPA is proposing to establish a cumulative secondary standard, and I'm explaining this as cumulative because plants are out there all the time. They don't get to go indoors when the ozone gets high. And they are growing the entire growing season. So they are trying to accrue biomass and grow according to, across in the entire growing season. And so the effects that we see from ozone actually are based on the cumulative exposure that they experience during that growing season. So this standard is a little different than a one-time peak or high concentration like the human health standard, the primary standard, and it's meant to represent how the plants are affected. And so we're looking at a level within a range of 7 to 15 parts per million hours. So the hours is meant to indicate that it is a cumulative standard. So we're looking at the concentration as it is accumulating across the hours. This cumulative standard would add weighted hourly ozone concentrations across all days in a 3-month period. So we're limiting it to the maximum 3-month period within the growing season. This is where we have concentration response functions that show this relationship between this type of exposure and the plant response. So the administrator is proposes that an 8-hour secondary standard would not be adequate. And so in the past, we've set the primary and the secondary equal. In the current reconsideration, we've got the primary standard, the health-based standard, being set as an 8-hour standard, and the administrator is making clear that she does not think that setting the secondary identical to that primary is adequate. The new secondary standard, which is also called the W126, and please don't worry about that, but the W stands for weighting, and we do weight higher concentrations more than lower because the plants are affected by higher concentrations more than lower. So we add a weighting factor that actually weights those concentrations. That's where the W126 comes in. And so I've already said all that. I think we'll move on. In a separate rule, EPA proposed in July 2009 to modify the ozone air quality monitoring network. And this monitoring proposal was done after the 2008 decisions in order to support those decisions. But because it was proposing changes that would better support both a primary and a secondary ozone standard, those proposed revisions are seen as suitable for the new reconsidered proposal as well, and so EPA is not planning to modify that monitoring proposal to suit the reconsideration. So the 2009 proposed monitoring revisions would modify the minimum monitoring requirements in urban areas and add new minimum monitoring requirements in non-urban areas, and extend the length of the required ozone monitoring season in many states. Specifically for the secondary standard, it's recommended that states look at adding 3 new monitors to support both the secondary and also the fact that if the primary gets lowered, there'll be exposures of concern in smaller urban areas that traditionally have not been monitored. So the monitoring season, I meant to look this up before I came and I forgot, and I apologize, but I'm not sure if anyone here knows but whether North Carolina would be affected by a change there. I'd have to look that up, but most states are actually going to be either extending their monitoring season by a month or two, or I think in one case they might actually be shortening it, but in most cases the monitoring seasons are going to be extended to take into account that ozone levels that fall within the range being proposed can occur outside the current monitoring season. So EPA is also considering comments received on the proposed monitoring requirements. That the public comment period has already ended, but EPA is considering these comments at this point, and they expect to issue the final monitoring rule in late summer, happening at approximately the same time as the issuance of the final ozone standards. I'm going to read this slide on implementation, and I am not an expert in any way on implementation, so I will read it to you, but if you have questions on this, you'll have to be deferred. I will get back to you if you need me to. So the Clean Air Act requires states and gives tribes the option to recommend to EPA which areas are and which areas are not meeting the new standards. EPA is proposing an accelerated schedule for designating areas for the primary ozone standard, and EPA is taking comment on whether to designate areas for a seasonal secondary standard on an accelerated schedule like the primary or on the regular 2-year schedule. EPA is reviewing existing designations guidance and will be communicating with states and tribes if additional guidance is needed. The 2008 8-hour ozone NAAQS and the 1997 8-hour ozone NAAQS remain in place while this reconsideration is underway. Implementation for the 2008 NAAQS, however, is delayed due to the reconsideration. States should continue their plans for implementing the 1997 NAAQS. And here's a schedule. As I mentioned earlier, we hope to have the final rule signed August 31st, and then states would then be required to give designation recommendations to EPA by January 2011. Final designations would be effective no later than August 2011, at 1 year later from the final rule, and then attainment demonstration SIPs due December 13th, and attainment dates 2014 to 2014 to 2031. So EPA is planning to propose an implementation rule in the spring of 2010 and issue a final rule as quickly as possible after the final ozone NAAQS. As I mentioned also earlier, that while we cannot consider cost and benefits, we do consider benefits in a limited way in looking at the standards, but we can't really consider cost. There still is a document that is produced in parallel with what we're doing to inform states and others as they look to what it might take to set the standards, and it's called the Regulatory Impact Analysis, or RIA. And so EPA had already conducted an RIA in conjunction with the 2008 decisions, but they did a supplement to that in order to support the reconsideration. And I'm not going to go into much here, but EPA does estimate the value of health benefits of reducing the ozone to 0.070 parts per million would range from about 13 billion to 37 billion per year in 2020. For a standard of 0.060 parts per million, the value of benefits would range from about 35 billion to 100 billion per year in 2020. The cost of reducing that ozone would range from an estimated 19 billion to 25 billion to get it down to 0.070, and for a standard of 0.060, the cost would range from 52 billion to 90 billion. With regard to the secondary standard, they weren't able to do much with that, but they did do a qualitative analysis on what it would take to meet the secondary standard in the proposed range. And I'm going to stop there. I don't know if I guess we'll do questions another time at the end, or do you want to?
Take a few minutes.
Okay. Are there any questions? Okay.
You mentioned the SIP. Could you explain what that is?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's called the State Implementation Plan, and that is when the states develop a plan to submit to EPA explaining how they expect they will attain the standards if they are out of attainment of the new standards. So they would identify proposals for how they would plan to meet that over the timeline that they have. So, yes?
Why is the timeline to meet the standards so long away?
Well, partly because of the difficulty for many areas in meeting the standard, I think. I mean, I think they want to give places time enough to put these programs in place and then see the results. And so it keeps it from being so burdensome to sort of have to meet it within a year or two. So usually areas have a longer time frame.
And so the 97 ones, they're still working on meeting those? Or?
Yes.
Okay. So do you know for our area who's still trying to meet the 97 ones?
I don't know. Does anyone else who's speaking going to be able to?
We're meeting it. Charlotte is not.
Okay. Charlotte's still out of attainment for 97.
Yes.
And is 2010 going to be the year then, if you're looking at states to report to you by early 2011, whether they're in attainment or not with whatever the new standards end up being, is 2010 going to be the year of reckoning, the date, the levels are going to be used?
Okay, so are you talking?
8 through 10. Okay, so
Yeah.
3-year average as one.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. That's my understanding at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If these new standards went into effect today, would this region be in attainment?
I think maybe I will abdicate the and let someone else come up. Paul, are you going to be speaking about some of this, or? Okay.
Okay.
I'll show you all our numbers.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
One last question. Does EPA have like a package of recommendations for places how to reach attainment, or is it just like they have to come up with their own?
I think the states take a first crack at that, but if they're having trouble, the EPA certainly steps in and works with them and tries to come to something together. But I've not had experience with that part of the process.
Is someone going to go over like the how-to?
I hope so.
Okay.
But if not, we can be in touch and get you more information.
Okay, thank you, Vicki. All right, at this time, I'd like to introduce Bill Jackson. He's the Air Resource Specialist with the U.S. Forest Service. You heard Vicki say that EPA is proposing to revise the secondary standard to better protect our environment. And so Bill is going to talk about the environmental impacts of ozone on plant species here in Western North Carolina. Bill, thanks for all your support over the years, and thanks for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
use this right there.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am going to talk about a little bit about the history of our program in one aspect, but what do we see in terms of ozone impacts currently? And we've been seeing these effects since 1992. And I'm going to take a little different angle and really talk about what would be the benefits of having a secondary standard in terms of protecting vegetation. The area I want to focus on that will represent really any aspect of western North Carolina is the Shining Rock Wilderness. Shining Rock Wilderness, if you're familiar with the Pisgah Inn, it's very close to there. We're probably about 45 minutes from Asheville. This area is a federally mandated Class 1 area according to the Clean Air Act amendments of 1977. And what the Act was dealing with there in terms of these special areas that have been set aside for protection from new sources of air pollution is that the Act says that the air quality related values, and an example of that would be the vegetation. Visibility is another example, but the Act says that these air quality related values are to be protected. And so one of the things to let you know is that ozone symptoms are common. Now, I have a little game going on with myself every year in late July, early August. I go out to the woods and I see how many minutes it will take me to find ozone symptoms. And it's typically less than 15. So it's very common to see the types of symptoms that I'll be showing you. And the species that we look at are species that have been exposed to ozone under controlled conditions, and we know that that particular species is sensitive. Not all species show symptoms of ozone. On herbaceous plants and hardwoods, we look between the veins, and I'm going to show you an example. We see a discoloration that occurs on the upper leaf surface. And also, typically what we'll see is that the older leaves are likely to have more symptoms, and sometimes they will fall off earlier than they should. And leaves that are exposed to the sunlight are more likely to have symptoms than those that are in the shade. Now, where we typically look for symptoms is going to an open area where we have plenty of sunlight, where there's ozone exposures. This is a picture near Graveyard Fields, which is just south of Shining Rock Wilderness, and this would be a typical area that we go through and look for sensitive plant species. And as I told you, there's discoloration that occurs on the upper leaf surface between the veins. Can you see those dark green veins, or those green veins there? Those, we don't see the symptoms on those at all. If we do see a discoloration occurring on the veins, it could be a disease or perhaps some insect damage that occurs. So we have ways to look at it. Now this one shows up a little bit better, doesn't it? This is a common milkweed, and see those main veins, they're green, and in between it's a black color, and it's confined to the upper leaf surface. This is what we observe when we find symptoms here in western North Carolina. And the older leaves sometimes will fall off prematurely. Now this particular slide was actually taken in West Virginia, and this is mid-July, and the leaves are already falling. That's a little too early for fall coloration. And so as Vicki had talked about, this particular plant, because the leaves are falling off early, they're not going to be building up as much carbohydrate reserves in their root systems. This is blackberry. This is one of the most common species that we see symptoms on. And again, though, on the left-hand side, we see a reddening on the foliage. Again, on the upper leaf surface, like we have a leaf flipped over. It's not on the bottom leaf surface. On the right, a little bit fuzzy there. But this is a blackberry canes. They survive for 2 years. First year canes, they don't produce fruit. Second year canes are the ones that we like. That's the ones we get the blackberries off. And then what happens is that they're clonal, and they will continue to sprout from the same area. And so we've been looking at this clone for quite a few years, and it continues to have the same type of symptoms every year. So just a lot of discoloration of the foliage by the 1st of August. This is black cherry, a tree species. There's a number of tree species that also will show symptoms. Here we see the older leaves have symptoms that are present. And this is tulip poplar, a very common species in our area, also that has symptoms on it. And we see some leaves that don't have symptoms. And so our work originally was done in 1992 through 1994, we went out and did surveys, and for 3 years in a row we saw surveys. And for us, that meant that the sensitive vegetation is having a physiological response to the ozone. It could be more than symptoms, but we couldn't document that at that time. And so we worked with the local air pollution control agency to establish this monitor in Haywood County. Now, there's been some changes in the programs, and now the state of North Carolina runs this monitor, but we've had a very good working relationship with the local program as well as with the state to get its numbers. And so we have numbers starting back in 1995. My most recent is 2008. The 2009 numbers are available, but I always get them I wait until about April or May before I actually pull the final numbers because they can be corrected. Vicki talked about the cumulative exposure called the W126, and if we look at the last three numbers, 2006 through 2008, the values are running between 10 and 13. So depending upon where EPA sets the standard, then we could be exceeding the secondary standard for a high elevation site. Oh, by the way, this site, that's the monitoring site. That's Mount Pisgah in the background on the right-hand side. I can see the TV tower in this shot. We're at about 5,200 feet is where this monitor is located. In terms of the last 3 years, in terms of the primary standard that's being proposed, we would be exceeding that. And we actually exceed the primary standard currently at the high elevations. So again, people that are visiting along the Blue Ridge Parkway, people that are walking around Shining Rock Wilderness or in Graveyard Fields, they are being exposed to unhealthy levels of ozone. And depending upon where EPA establishes this secondary standard, we would interpret the results, if they make it low enough that we're having effects to sensitive vegetation. So what happens if, also I want to talk about this because Vicki did talk about this briefly. This on the left-hand side is the Bent Creek monitor. This is the monitor that's used for attainment purposes for Asheville. It's run by the local air pollution control agency. On the right-hand side is the monitor results that and both of these are for 1998 at the Frying Pan site or the Shining Rock site. And Vicki talked about that diurnal pattern where it's low during the nighttime hours and into the morning, and then it builds during the day. Whereas at the high elevation sites, we have pretty much a flat line. And also at the high elevation sites, when we compare the data, we see that on average, in terms of each hour of the day, the high elevation site has higher ozone exposures than the low elevation site. These sites are about 30 miles apart. Again, the Bent Creek is a low elevation site here in the valley at about 2,000 feet. The high elevation site for representing Shining Rock Wilderness is at about 5,200 feet, and it has higher ozone exposures. We don't have that decreases during the nighttime. And another thing to know about when we start teasing the data out a little bit more, the highest concentrations actually occur between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., which is interesting. And that suggests to us that we have a long-range transport problem into the high elevations, and Vicki had mentioned that. One of the suspect areas, in my opinion, would be Knoxville. Knoxville does not attain the standard, and so we think that ozone is building up in Knoxville during the daytime. Some of the precursors are also coming out of the Knoxville area. Also, we're adding to those precursors. We're not off the hook completely ourselves, and then it's transported into the high elevations. So another thing about Shining Rock Wilderness, I said it was a Class 1 area, but it's also a wilderness. And we have a number of wildernesses in western North Carolina. And one of the things that Congress intended for a wilderness is that it's an area where the earth and its communities of life are untrammeled by man. That's a different word, isn't it? Untrammeled. What we mean, it's not restricted, not limited or restricted. It's unimpaired by man's activities. And it's also an area that's protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions. So wildernesses really are managed. We don't do timber harvest in them, but they're managed for their natural character. When we go into a wilderness, you are the visitor into that area. And what we hope that you will see is that there are natural processes that are occurring. And so if there's a strong storm event, that's part of that process. If there's a wildfire, that's part of the natural process of a wilderness. And so that's the characteristics that, in terms of this type of management of these areas. And ozone can impair the natural conditions and the ecological processes. The scientific evidence clearly demonstrates that that can occur. In the last slide, we actually have mapped, done ecological mapping of our 3 Class 1 areas. And for the Forest Service, that's Linville Gorge, Shining Rock Wilderness, and Joyce-Kilmer Slick Rock. And so we actually know something about the different plant communities that are out there. We know something about the species that are in each of those communities, even something about the abundance of those species. And when we look at these different communities and say, well, which ones contain ozone-sensitive species? In Shining Rock Wilderness, most of the area has 1 or more ozone-sensitive species that occurs. And so we think that reductions of the ozone exposures, reductions in the W126, will allow natural competition to occur between species. Some of you folks may be familiar with a study that was finished a few years ago, and Paul, I've even lost track now. Is it 2002 or 2005? The Southern Appalachian Mountains Initiative. And when we worked on that project, one of the things we pointed out with ozone is that the ozone-sensitive species are at a competitive disadvantage. They have less growth that occurs. Other species that are not sensitive, they can actually capitalize, if you allow me to say it that way, in that situation. And so they're able to take up that space that the ozone-sensitive species aren't able to because they're being reduced by ozone. And so we think that, again, the secondary standard will move those areas more to natural processes. Remember, under the Wilderness Act, these are areas that are supposed to be having natural processes occur. Well, if there's natural processes that are going to occur, that means there's going to be change. There can be natural changes. And so, for example, this is a modeling study that we've done looking at site characteristics. And I'm only looking at 1 species here. This would be sensitive species. The common names are black cherry and fire cherry. We find those in Shining Rock Wilderness. And the dark green areas that are in the bottom half of Shining Rock Wilderness currently are in shrub balds and grasslands. And as ecological processes occur in that area, depending upon whether there's exposure of the soil, there probably is black cherry seeds that are present, and they can germinate, and then they'll start growing in these areas. So if we allow natural processes to occur, if you really enjoy those grass balds, well, someday they may be gone, because the natural processes would be next for the black cherries and the fire cherries to start filling into those areas. And the same with the shrub balds. Now, further to the north, that's near Cold Mountain. That's predominantly oak areas. And sometimes we have something here in western North Carolina called downbursts. They're really, really strong winds that occur. And I'm going to describe it this way. They sort of blow up the forest in a small area. Could be several acres in size. Or if we have hurricane storms come in, they can topple trees in an area. Areas that are exposed that have a lot of sunlight, those are potential areas that black cherry could come into. So again, though, that would be part of the natural process that occurs in those areas. And by reducing the ozone exposures, especially the higher concentrations, but the overall cumulative should allow natural processes to occur so that even these ozone-sensitive species can fulfill their natural role. And we do have a website. This is a picture of Cold Mountain that we take. And if you do view this site, we like to apologize because the camera tends to be down quite often. These are remote sites, and we lose power. We have lightning strikes. We have all kinds of problems. But when the camera works, it's a beautiful thing to look at each day. Any questions? Yeah.
If the high elevation problems are due to transport, how is it that you set the secondary standards? Where are those imposed at?
The secondary standards is going to be based upon, and Vicki's going to jump in on this too, it's based upon what we know about the science of the species that are sensitive. So it has nothing to do about how the area is going to be cleaned up. That becomes another issue. So the secondary standard is going to be set at a level to protect the sensitive vegetation.
I guess I'm asking about implementation.
Right. So you really touched on implementation questions. So that so once the monitoring shows that an area exceeds the secondary standard, then it will be up to the state, local, and tribal programs to work together to come up with a plan to reduce ozone. And that plan may involve Western North Carolina. It could also involve bringing in Eastern Tennessee. It could involve bringing in Georgia. So there's atmospheric models that are used. And when these atmospheric models are used, they have to develop a very detailed emissions inventory. And once they've developed the emissions inventory, they've run the models to match current conditions that are out there in terms of what we've monitored in the past. Then they can, the air regulatory agencies can start playing what-if games. That is, well, what if we start reducing emissions from power plants? Would that make a change? Would that bring the levels down? Does that help answer your question?
But it's not like a county or physical boundary. We're talking.
It's going to be regional.
Regional or national.
For our area here, in terms of ozone, I'm going to suggest that it's going to be regional in nature.
But it could encompass several states.
Mm-hmm. It could, yeah, or portions of states. That is correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But it would be a mistake to blame all of the ozone on other places.
that is correct. We contribute to it also. I don't know until the atmospheric modeling is done, so that we can look at that. But we learned during this Southern Appalachian Mountains Initiative, during that process, that when we have periods of air stagnation, so air stagnation means the air is not moving very much. And that's when we have our highest ozone concentrations. And based upon that, we saw that sources, so what do I mean by that? Well, that would be power plants, that would be automobiles, it could be industries that are releasing nitrogen oxides. But we saw that sources from eastern Tennessee as well as North Carolina contribute to the problems in western North Carolina. Yeah.
On your table where you showed the concentrations, the W126
Yeah.
and different years, 1999 is like 3 times more than recent years. What was the major shift occurring around that time period?
Hot and dry
Yeah.
versus 2000, cool and moist.
That's what I was assuming, so I know this is a little maybe extraneous to the conversation.
Oh, no.
I'm just curious, has there ever been any attempts to see how sun cycles or solar activities cycles impact this? Obviously, your hotter and drier days, I would assume, in solar cycles, which we're getting ready to go into a more active time, so.
I don't know. I don't know of any papers on that look specifically at solar cycles. But when you have less rainfall, you have less cloud cover, so we have more sunshine. And during that period in 1999, we had quite a few days of stagnation. But it's
And that was a peak solar cycle. And
Which is interesting.
I'm curious about this because that's when I saw Aurora Borealis in Madison County, so,
Mhm.
something's going on when we have that.
Yeah. Yeah, so ozone is going to fluctuate. I mean, you've observed something. It does fluctuate, over a number of years. But we hope that as we continue to implement, in particular, nitrogen oxide control strategies, these numbers will continue to be reduced. Go ahead.
I don't know if I said, but the secondary standard that we are looking at is a 3-year average. Did I mention that? So we'd be looking at it over 3 years.
That is correct. Yeah, similar. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Bill?
Thank you, Bill. Great job, as always. Appreciate it. All right, we're running a little bit behind schedule, so if we could limit the break to about 10 minutes. So it is break time, and then we'll have presentations by Paul Muller and Ashley Featherstone, and they'll present some of the data for our monitors here in Western North Carolina, give you an idea of kind of how we stand versus these proposed standards. So let's take a break for about 10.
Continue, we have like our finance department, but that's all internal stuff. Just under 50 people.
All right, we'll get started in just a second, if everybody will have a seat. Okay, up next is Paul Muller. Paul is the Regional Supervisor of the State Division of Air Quality's Asheville Regional Office and has been very involved in our campaign and clean vehicles work for many years. And Paul, appreciate all your support. And Paul today is going to talk about the ozone forecasting season, how the state comes up with those forecasts, and also talk about the ozone pollution levels that we're seeing at monitors throughout western North Carolina and touch on several other issues. So, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. We're here to celebrate the onset of the forecast season. I'm sure it's a big deal in everyone's life, so I want to start with that. We do forecasting for ozone from September 1st from April 1st through the end of September. They're issued every afternoon for the following day, and they're generated by our meteorology folks in Raleigh. They actually do them for quite a large area. I want to remind everyone, though, that the forecast also includes fine particles, PM 2.5. So when a daily forecast comes out, it could be based on either one of those. Whichever is expected to have a higher concentration that day to be a bigger problem, if you will, that is the one that will control the overall color code for the forecast that particular day. We do forecasting for PM 2.5 year-round, so we have forecasts for today if you want to check on it. But with ozone, as said before, it's more of a summertime pollutant, so this is when we start with that. And the color code we use is the Federal Air Quality Index, excuse me, and which green means good, yellow is moderate, and when we get to orange, then we are sensitive for the populations that are sensitive to that particular pollutant, then it becomes unhealthy for them. We have never had a red day in the mountains. I hope that continues forever. But to link then the concentration to the air quality index, we turn to this slide. As you can see, for green, it means the ozone concentration is expected to be less than 60 parts per billion. We saw lots of 070s, 075s, parts per million before. Just move a decimal 3 points and you get parts per billion. So 60 is equivalent to 0.060 ppm. Then the current standard is 75 parts per billion. That's going to be changed, but our forecasting this year is all based on that standard of 75 parts per billion. So moderate runs up to that standard. Once we get over that standard, then we enter the orange range. So that is how we are doing the ozone forecasting throughout this season. Even when the new standard is announced in August, we'll finish the season out with this. For PM 2.5, just to give you a comparison, the daily standard is 35. So there, the mark between yellow and orange is at 35 micrograms per cubic meter. So those are the numbers we use to generate forecasts. So now that we know all about the colors, where do you find the forecast? This is our website, ncair.org. If you go there, we have this wonderful air quality forecast button you can click on. It will take you to this page. And if you wanted to, you could check on Raleigh, you can check on Charlotte, but mostly we care about the mountains. So you would click there. Our ridgetop forecast will be indicated in color here. The valley is indicated here. We do not do ridgetop forecasts for PM 2.5 because we can't get up on top of Mount Mitchell in the middle of the winter to run a monitor. But we can get up there in the middle of the summer to run ozone. So we do have ozone forecasts for the ridgetops. We have PM 2.5 and ozone forecast for the valleys. And you can go to that site. And actually, we're looking at the top half of this web page. If you go to the bottom half, then you can look across. It tells you the area, the color code for ozone for PM 2.5. It's going to give you these numbers and then the overall code color. So for the valleys, we are currently doing PM 2.5. I pulled this off on Friday. You can see that it was a code green forecast. Once we start ozone, we'll have numbers here as well. And you can see, though, that the Triad area, in Winston-Salem area, the Forsyth County program does the forecasting there. They had already started issuing numbers for ozone. So you can look right there. They were forecasting 33, so both their forecast for ozone and fine particles was green on that particular day. So you can always go to the website. If you'd rather get an email to tell you the forecast every day, I'm back on the top half of that web page. Come right here. Forecast Emails in ViroFlash. You click on that, it will take you to a web page where you can sign up to receive an email every day to tell you what the forecast is for ozone and fine particles. So if you want to do that, then every day you get an email that looks like this. And this is actually from last April. It's for the Asheville Valleys. On April 23rd, forecast is moderate. And that forecast was based on particle pollution, PM 2.5. That's how you can tell what was the controlling pollutant for that particular forecast. Interestingly enough, the next day, April 24th, once again moderate, but it was ozone that controlled the forecast that day. So when you receive your email, that's how you can see what it was. I also encourage you to go on and read down below. It has some explanations for the color codes as well as things you can do to help with air pollution. So fundamentally, you can go to our website. You can call this number if you'd like. You can get the emails. You can also go to an EPA website and get forecasts across the nation if you'd like to check that out. And of course, our local TV station, the newspaper, and the Weather Channel all carry this kind of information as well. So there's good access to forecasting. If you're going on a hike one day, though, and you'd like to know, gosh, what is the air quality today at a particular location, once again, I recommend that you go to our website. This time, though, go to Current by Site under Monitoring Data. If you click right here on Current by Site, it takes you to this page. Now, if you want to know something about Wilmington, you can click over here or here. But once again, since the mountains are obviously the most important part of the state, we would click in this area, and it's going to show you this. Each dot represents a monitor in western North Carolina. They're color-coded down here to tell you which one it is. And so if you wanted to go hiking at Mount Mitchell, this is going to tell you the ozone in Mount Mitchell. It's in Yancey County. If you want to go into the park, this is Purchase Knob inside the Smoky Park. And this one is Bryson City, and I'm going to show you that one, because that is one place where we have both PM 2.5 and ozone monitoring going on. So I click there, it tells me I'm in Bryson. This once again was Friday. I'm looking at our current reading for PM 2.5 is 1.9. That is very low. That's a good day to go out there. Okay, ozone, we're giving it in parts per million now, 0.025. That would be 25 parts per billion, 0.025 parts per million. They tell you all the units here you can come across. We're also monitoring for sulfur dioxide there this year. We do that once every 3 years. But in this location, we also have weather data, MET data as we call it. So if you were interested in that, you can check. We do not have that for every site. Some sites are only ozone, some sites are only PM 2.5, some have a variety of information. So if you ever want to check it out, go look though. It's really worth your time to see what the real-time data is if you're going out. This shows a map that indicates where our ozone monitors are in western North Carolina. The triangles here, high elevation sites, and there's one right here as well in Graham County for Joanna Bald. The circles, those are the valley sites. So the triangles are the data from those high elevation sites are used to do the ridgetop forecast. The data from the circle sites are used to do our valley forecasts. So the numbers, we heard all about what are the new standards going to be in that 60 to 70 part per billion range, okay? So this shows what our most recent data is. We take the fourth highest reading each year for 3 years in a row, average them together. We have remarkable consistency in the high elevation sites. They're all 74. So they would all exceed the 70 that would be the highest level that the new standard would be set at. Okay? They are all, though, achieving, because right now the new current standard 75, you'd have to be 76 or higher to be in non-attainment with the current standard. So we're hoping for a remarkably clean summer that will pull those numbers way down. Barnett Knob is actually a site that's operated by the Cherokee tribe, but they had some data problems, and so they don't have an acceptable number to plug in right at this point in time. So looking at our valley sites, though, there they are. They're all below 70. If EPA would be kind enough to set the new standard at 70, we'll have be in attainment with those. Of course, our data to determine attainment will be based on 08 through 10. 07 was a high year. We had high concentrations that year. We're dropping off a big number. 09 was a very low year, so if we can add another low number, we'll see all of these numbers go down. If, however, 10 turns out to be a bad year for ozone, those numbers could stay where they are or even go up. But you can see that we have a difference between the two, the valleys and the ridgetops. So it's possible the ridgetops would be failing to attain, but the valley sites would be okay. Stay tuned. That's my current theme, is stay tuned. But to look at it over time, here our first, what we have here is a graph that shows each line going up and down is for a particular monitor. If you want to try to look at the color codes, here they are. But it gives you an overall trend. We were doing very good through the early 2000s. We were going down, down, down. But unfortunately, 07 was a high year. It bumped us back up. Then we started coming down a little bit. Last year we came down quite a bit because 09 was a very clean year. We're hoping to see this kind of do this kind of thing over here, you know, come way down in the future. But we probably, hopefully, will see at least a continued decline in concentrations over time. We talked about the secondary standard. Bill touched on that as well, related to the trying to protect the environment and the health of vegetation. So these are numbers I pulled off of an EPA website. Make sure we calculated it the same way that they would. It's for 06 through 08, though. This is older data. And it shows at 15, we'd be okay. Even this one in Haywood, which I assume is probably frying pan. I think it's a little higher than Purchase Knob. At 7, none of them would make it. So we'll see where they set it. Once again, we're in the same situations. We could have some sites that meet the secondary standard while other monitoring sites do not. So stay tuned. To give you some statewide data, though, to see how the trend has been going, you can see what a remarkably clean year 09 was. What this graph here, this darker brown last line in each one is the number of days in North Carolina when a monitor somewhere in North Carolina exceeded the standard. Okay? Exceeded our standard of 75. We only had 6 days in all of the summer of 2009 where a monitor somewhere in North Carolina went over 75. That's obviously the cleanest summer we've ever had in recent memory, and I'm probably ever, not ever, but back since recorded history. So you can turn back and see 07. We had 66 days in 07 when we had readings exceeding that level. So that's why dropping this year off and looking at 08 and 09 plus 010, which we hope will be very low as well, those are the three numbers, 08, 09, 010, yeah, 010, I like that, will be determining our, the number we use to compare to the new standard. So how do we keep getting cleaner then so we can meet the tighter standards? We develop these state implementation plans, but in a lot of ways we depend on the federal government to put in place reduction programs that will affect a large area. The most important one to us right now is the Clean Air Interstate Rule. It requires reductions in NOx, nitrogen oxides, and SO2, sulfur dioxide. Reductions in NOx will help ozone. Reductions in SO2 will help fine particles. Unfortunately, when they pushed that rule through, it got thrown out by the courts. But the courts did say that the first round of reductions required under that rule would be kept. So they're in the process of being put in place now, and EPA is in the process of revising the rest of the rule so that it meets the legal requirements. We have the same issue with mercury. Mercury doesn't affect ozone, but it's a key pollutant. And the rule passed by the federal government was sent back. The court said they had done it under the wrong section of the Clean Air Act. So we're looking forward to getting that back. Boilers are a big source of emissions, and the MACT refers to hazardous air pollutants such as arsenic that come from boilers. We were really hoping to get that in place to help clean up the air. It got sent back by the courts as well. The sooner we can get that out, the sooner our air will be cleaner as well. But we're very much in limbo right now. There are a lot of things we're waiting for. The new standard, more reductions in emissions, etc. So the future will be interesting. I also wanted to touch on climate change. EPA is working on that now. They have designated greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, as pollutants. They never were before. The tailoring rule is a rule they're working on to try to mesh the greenhouse gas rules with previous rules To be a problem in greenhouse gases, you have to emit a lot of CO2. But whereas we didn't have to emit nearly that much of, for example, SO2 to be a problem. So this will try to bring those rules into more conformity. Congress is actually working on a greenhouse gas bill. I don't know if they'll ever get it proposed and passed, but it's actually bipartisan, which is hard to believe these days. EPA is requiring inventories now for greenhouse gases. This coming year will be the first time we actually do that. And North Carolina does have a commission in place that's been working for several years. They're actually going to issue a report this year, and there's a good chance that commission will be made permanent and continue to work on greenhouse gas issues in the state. Once again, we're very much waiting for more to happen when it comes to greenhouse gases. So in the meantime, though, we always encourage you to do what you can do. Use less electricity, less power, drive less, everything you can do to reduce the emissions that come from combustion of fossil fuels will help. So check it out. You can sign up for green power and use more alternative fuels and help there, renewables. Good planning always helps too. But if you have any questions, there's a lot of information on our website, and you're always welcome to call me or send me an email. I'd be glad to get back with you on any questions you have. Thanks.
Any questions for Paul?
Yes, sir.
Michael?
Do the existing monitors have the capability to track CO2, or new monitors be required?
New monitors would be required. We have a different monitor for each pollutant. I don't know of any monitor that does multi-pollutants.
And then another question was, do you know what the entity level would be for the greenhouse gas reporting?
Well, the first number that was put out was 25,000 tons per year. If you're a facility that emits more than 25,000 tons per year, you'd be required to report. However, what I've heard lately from EPA is that they feel that number is too low. It could go up to like 50,000 tons per year of greenhouse gases to require you to report. They haven't really nailed that down, and they're getting lots of comments about it. So they will eventually nail that down, and we'll know exactly what it is.
And then one more was, do you
Sure.
know the name of the NC commission that's going to be, is that the KPAG?
The commission is a legislative commission, and so they will be coming out with that. The one you're referring to, I think, was the group that was helping to develop alternatives. These are things we could do if you choose to do it as a legislature. The Legislative Commission is preparing a report with recommendations on what they think should be done, but then it would have to be introduced as a bill to the legislature to get it to pass. And there's a lot on the web about that if you want to read. And there's been several articles in the paper lately about whether this commission should be made permanent now. So I wish I knew more to help you there. Yes, ma'am.
New monitoring stations that you talked about, where might those be in our region?
Well, in terms of ozone and fine particles, we are told we have adequate numbers. We actually have a lot of monitors compared to many states. We're unique in the fact that we have these high elevation monitors. Most places don't do that. We've done that in conjunction with the Forest Service and the Park Service to cover all of the Class 1 areas here. Then we also added Mount Mitchell, which is actually not a Class 1 area. It's a state park, but it's very well known. So I don't see that we will be adding any more ozone or fine particle monitoring here. There are some other issues going on, such as lead. They've brought back lead now. It's become part of our program again. We may need to put in a monitor for lead. If so, I think it would be in Asheville, and the local program would operate that. But stay tuned. We'll hear more about that as we go.
And one follow, how do you see implementing lower standards at the high elevation monitoring sites? How will that come about?
Well, if the high elevation sites fail to attain the new standard, we will have to make a recommendation. And you can look back on our website. We were in the process of doing that with the current standard at one time. But then everything was changed when the new administration came in. If the valley sites are showing attainment, the high elevation sites are not, we will recommend that areas around the high elevation monitors above 4,000 feet in elevation be designated non-attainment, but not the valleys around them. Okay, that's what we did last time, and we had a map that showed this is what it would be for the frying pan monitor, this for Purchase Knob, this for Mount Mitchell. It was a small area up there above 4,000 feet. Now, when you go to develop your implementation plan, though, to show how you're going to achieve that, we would have to do the computer modeling to demonstrate is there any enough that we could do within North Carolina to achieve that or not? If not, we would make recommendations that other states would need to make reductions as well to achieve it. Of course, other states like Georgia, Atlanta's has a problem. Tennessee, Knoxville has a problem. They're going to have to be making reductions as well, and we will benefit from their reductions. Fortunately, the states work together now to do modeling, and they will share with each other what reductions they plan to make, and that can be incorporated in that modeling. You're welcome. Going. Thank you much.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Here, I'll leave this here in case. Ashley wants to use it.
Up next is Ashley Featherstone. She's the engineering supervisor with the Western North Carolina Regional Air Quality Agency here in Asheville, and she'll be talking about air quality levels in Buncombe County and some of the programs that they have in place, including their idle reduction campaign, working with the schools. So Ashley, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for being here and participating in this Clean Air Campaign event. As Bill said, I'm mainly going to talk about local pollution issues. Here in Western North Carolina, we do have some unique challenges with air quality because of our topography. Sometimes this is referred to as a bowl effect or a mountain valley inversion, but what we have seen is that sometimes pollution can get trapped down low in these bowl-shaped areas when there are stagnant air conditions, and the pollution can build up in these areas and it won't dissipate until the weather patterns actually shift, allowing the pollution to dissipate. So it goes back to the solution to pollution is dilution, and when we do have stagnant air conditions in the mountains, we do see those levels build up. And as Bill mentioned earlier, we have found, studies have shown that some of our worst air quality days here in the mountains are when we are experiencing these stagnant air conditions. And so any locally generated pollution can certainly exacerbate that. While we do have the pollution coming in from the other areas, that certainly contributes, and especially up on the ridge tops. But again, we like to stress that we do have a lot of locally generated pollution that we try to address. This is just a slide showing some sources of air pollution here in Western North Carolina. Obviously, cars and trucks contribute to the NOx that reacts with the VOCs and forms ozone in the hot summer days. Also, our power plant is a major source of NOx emissions. And even trees, you don't think about that often, but trees actually emit VOCs that contribute as well. And as a result of the fact that we do have pollution from natural sources, from the VOCs that we just mentioned, we call our area NOx limited. So basically the strategies that we implement to reduce ozone focus on reducing NOx. And here in Buncombe County, our largest sources of NOx by far are cars and trucks. I've got some data coming up that's going to show a lot of really good reductions at our local power plant. And as a result of that, again, cars and trucks are the biggest source of the NOx emissions here in our area. So this is just a slide showing the current standard of 75 parts per billion. And as Paul mentioned earlier, our current design value, which is that 3-year average of the 4th highest level, is 69 parts per billion at the Bent Creek Monitor here in Buncombe County. And as Paul also showed, the other upper elevation monitors are running around 74 right now. And of course, EPA is proposing to lower the standard into this range of 60 to 70 parts per billion. So, as Paul said, we'll stay tuned. This is just a graph showing some of the data at our Bent Creek Monitor, and this is actually the 3-year average design value, which is a 3-year average of that 4th highest concentration. You can see that right now our current design value of 69 is down quite a bit from previous years, up from a high of 85 in the 2000 to 2002 time frame. Now this graph, what it shows is the actual annual 4th highest max level of ozone. So you can see the trends really well here. Obviously we had some really high years where we were up around 90 parts per billion between 98 and 2002, and right now you can see that we had a little bit higher year in 2005, went back up to 79, but again our most recent year was all the way down to 64. So the trend is good. The trend is showing that we are making progress here. So we feel very positive about that. And again, you know, a lot of this has to do with weather. But the good news is we do have a lot of emissions reductions from the big power plants and even from cars and trucks as we get more turnover of the vehicles with the cleaner vehicles and the cleaner gas that's been required in recent years. So we feel like we're moving in a good direction. But of course, there's always more work to be done as we learn that the standards are not protecting the public health enough. So we need to get those numbers lowered, obviously. This is just a graph of the air quality index. This is actually just ozone air quality index data. And one thing that's kind of interesting that we tried to point out to folks last year in 2008, actually the 2007 to 2008, we actually had a slight drop in the ozone level, but in 2008 we had more yellow days and fewer green days. And that was because 2008 was when the standard was lowered down to the current 75 level. And so we tried to tell folks that we do have more yellow days. Our numbers are actually going down, but of course the standard is getting more protective of public health. So sometimes that's a little bit confusing to explain. But the graph does show that in 2009, even with this lower standard, as Paul said, we just had a really clean year and mostly green days, only 6 days that were yellow and no orange days. So this is some data that shows emissions reductions here at our local power plant. Progress Energy is a coal-fired power plant, and we've seen some tremendous reductions as a result of the North Carolina Clean Smokestacks Act. Over here on the left, these are the SO2 emissions, and SO2 does contribute to the fine particles that we have in our area, and those fine particles do contribute to the regional haze that obscure our mountain views, especially in the summertime. So you can see our emissions have gone from 15,000 tons all the way down to 600 tons, which is really amazing. And over here on the right, we're looking at our NOx emissions reductions. So the previous graph showed we've had some good reductions in ozone levels from 2005 through 2009, and you can see that Progress Energy has reduced those NOx emissions very significantly. And that is why the cars and trucks are by far the biggest source of NOx emissions here in Buncombe County right now. Another benefit of these controls that have been installed at our local power plant are the reductions in the mercury emissions that we're seeing. And they've done testing on the scrubbers. They have several different control devices out there at the plant that have been added in recent years. And the scrubbers alone are reducing the mercury emissions by roughly 73%. They think they're actually getting even larger reductions from the combination of the different equipment, but we do know that the scrubbers are reducing the emissions by 73%. And they have installed continuous emission monitors to monitor the mercury here at the local power plant. So that's very encouraging. And I'd like to shift gears for a minute. In addition to working with our state and federal partners to implement the air quality regulations here in Buncombe County, we do have some voluntary initiatives that we're working on. I wanted to tell you about those real briefly. We do have a citizens advisory committee that we get a lot of input from that helps us out with these different type initiatives. And we recently partnered with the North Carolina Division of Air Quality to have these idle reduction signs put up at the local schools. So if you're seeing these out at the schools, we are encouraging folks to participate. And what this is a voluntary campaign just asking parents mainly to not idle their vehicles when they're in the schoolyard picking up the kids. Now obviously when you're in the queue and you're having to pull forward, then you have to run your vehicle, but have noticed that a lot of times folks get to school really early and they're just waiting for school to get let out, and that was when we would really like to ask people to try to think about the emissions there and not idle your vehicles. A vehicle exhaust has been linked to a lot of health effects, including higher rates of cancer, heart and lung disease, allergies, and asthma. So we definitely want to keep that in mind when we're in the schoolyards. And of course, idling wastes money and isn't good for the environment and contributes to our ozone problem. And in fact, idling more than 3 minutes actually uses more gas than starting and stopping the engine. So what we'd like to do is just ask everybody to keep in mind this policy or this initiative. And the local school bus transportation folks do have idling policies in place for the school buses. And so they're pretty well on board with that. But if you notice buses idling for longer than 5 minutes or longer than I think is allowed by the policy, you could bring it up. But mainly we're asking folks to think about idling and make an effort not to idle if not necessary. And also, there's other things you can do to try to lower your idling, like avoiding drive-throughs. And we have a lot of signs that are available for groups if they want to put them up at their organization. And I know that Paul's group has been working with the schools in the other mountain counties to get signs up there. If you have an organization or different groups that would like signs, please let us know, because we do have some that we might be able to make available depending on how many we have. So, again, here's a map that the Division of Air Quality has up on the Clean School Bus webpage, which is sponsored by the Department of Public Instruction. It does show the campaign, contact folks, and where you can request signs for your area. And another initiative that we've been working on here locally is a cleaner burning technology initiative. Buncombe County TV helped us put together a PSA with the help of our advisory committee. And what we're trying to do is encourage people that are heating with wood, and this speaks more to particulate matter pollution than it does ozone, but what we're trying to do is encourage folks that heat with wood to consider reducing their emissions by checking to see if their stove meets EPA emission standards. The newer stoves do meet these standards. If your stove was built after July of 1990, it should meet these cleaner standards. So one way you can check is to look on the back of the stove for the metal tag and find out. And there are federal tax credits right now that are available for certain stoves. So what we're trying to do is encourage folks that have the older, less efficient, and higher polluting stoves to swap out their stove with a newer stove that meets the emission limits. The other benefits are they don't produce as much creosote that can lead to chimney fires, and they're more efficient, so you burn less wood. So if anybody's interested in that, feel free to give us a call. There is a minimum efficiency standard that the stove has to meet in order to be eligible for that tax credit, but the tax credit is 30%. That includes the cost of the stove, the installation, and any additional equipment associated with it. Diesel retrofits are another project that we've been working on over the years. We recently got a grant from North Carolina DENR to retrofit some fire trucks here in Buncombe County in the city of Asheville. And we're working on that project right now, hoping to retrofit as many as 30 or so trucks. So if that's successful, and we expect it will be, we're hoping to expand that to cover more of the fleet. So you should be hearing about that soon, hopefully, as we try to get that underway. So these are just some tips and things that we encourage folks to do to try to reduce air pollution. Anything that conserves energy or leads to driving less, driving more fuel-efficient vehicles, supporting programs like NC Green Power are all things that we can do as individuals to try to make a difference. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Not working. Thank you, Ashley. Great job. Okay, I want to open it up for questions for any of the presenters here today. Anyone have any questions for any of the other presenters? Okay. All right. They will be available when we're finished, and you can grab them outside. First of all, I just want to thank all of our presenters today. Let's give them a round of applause. They all did a great job. We learned here today that we do have some air quality issues here in Western North Carolina, and that we do need to take action to address those. You heard a lot about what is already being done. A lot is being done at the local, state, and federal level, but a lot more needs to be done if we're going to continue to reduce our pollution levels, especially with the growth that will come here to Western North Carolina. I just wanted to remind folks that there is a lot of grant money out there right now, especially through the stimulus bill. for all sorts of renewable and energy efficiency projects, and also funding for greening your fleet as well. So I encourage you all to get involved and to give us a call. Get involved in our Clean Air Campaign or Clean Vehicles Coalition and some of the other organizations that are working on these issues.